Hi, welcome to Nutrition Counselling Unscripted, podcast number 2. This is Townson, pronouns she, her, and I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of Fort William First Nation. As always, I'm here with
Cath, Morley, pronouns she and they, and I am here in Mi'kmaq, the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq, which is today known as Nova Scotia. Carol, today we're going to talk about how did it come to be that being professional meant being emotionless?
Yes, I was thinking about that when you were sharing last week, Cath, about the work that you had started out doing in the cancer. So if we think about the idea of where this idea came from, about being professional and yet being emotionless, I really start to think about our profession of how we developed as dietitians and where we came from. Knowing that dietitians really were working in a very male-dominated medical model field and really wanted to have some credibility. So I wonder what your thoughts are about that, Kathy.
Yeah, Carol, back, let's see, what is it now? 2021. So let's call it 100 years when dietetics first emerged as a specialty within home economics. But even before that, in home economics, was an area for and by, an area of study, for and by women, cis women, with the view to improving the health of Canadians or wherever people were around the world with a pretty, I don't want to say heavy-handed, but kind of a heavy-handed view of we will tell you what to do and then go ahead and do it. I know home economics is much more nuanced and fabulous than that, but there's been a dominant theme throughout that we have expert knowledge. We will share that with you. You will go away and do exactly what I told you to do per the compliance conversation we had in podcast 1. And then all will be well. So it was kind of a comfortable expert, what's the word? Expert expert dominated view that people could only be consulting with a dietitian because they were desperate for that knowledge. And has traditionally been the domain of cis women, heterosexual women. And of course, that's all changing. Was never true, actually. But we're recognizing that more now in this era. And the powers that are, well, I don't want to say the powers, but the male dominance within health and human services with physicians at the top of the heap. So in order to have credence to be considered, what's a better word than credence? Legit? It's not good either, but we had to, go ahead.
I was going to say, no, that whole idea that we would be taken as being knowledgeable and being, good at what we actually do in that piece.
If we weren't emotional.
Yes.
Yes. Then there's the history of misogyny and masculism and the unworthiness of women that has plagued women for centuries, if not millennia, but not always in the world. We know of cultures where that was not the case, that it's what we've inherited. So that was the origins, I think, for dietitians of if I am emotionless and I go about my job in a almost like a robotic fashion. Oh, I even hate to say that, but not bringing emotion into it, that I will be a better dietitian. I will actually be doing my job. And of course, that doesn't work. And I love when you talk about the difference between the theory of what we're doing and the reality of what we encounter in workplaces. So could you speak a bit about that, Carol?
Yeah, I really, when I think about it, when we do go into work, our work that we do as dietitians is extremely hard. It's extremely emotional. We work with people who are very vulnerable. I always have to quote one of my colleagues, Tracy Palicki, who would say to me, it's like, nobody ever wakes up in the morning and says, my life is going perfect. I want to make changes. So when people come to see us dietitians, it's because something's not going well. So, you think about it, we know that when they first walk in and meet with us, that they're going to be in a state of emotion. And we need to recognize that and know that their emotion can actually impact us. I
Well, not
think
can, Carol, does.
it does.
Does. Yeah.
Does, exactly. And I remember being in my training thinking that I'm not supposed to respond to that. And how, for myself, there was such dissonance. I was sitting in with a client who is very emotional, and me going in my head going, yeah, but I got to tell you about what you need to eat. And it really like, did not fit well with me.
Yeah, it feels
Um,
so like I don't want to say imbalanced. That's not right. It just feels so wrong, right? As
it
you say, there's
does.
dissonance. There's not comfort there.
Because I would think in any other environment, I would not have acted like that.
No, if that were your friend, you would
Exactly.
respond, right?
Yeah.
Or that
But
person
when I
wouldn't be your friend anymore, I suppose. But there we have a poor, person who came seeking advice and counsel, and they're trapped in a room. You don't want to be trapped in a room with a robot.
no, no, and I mean, well, and again, you and I both started out before the internet days.
Yes, we
So
did.
people didn't really get a choice. If they were seeking help with nutrition, they actually need to seek out an actual person.
An actual person. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I dare say, even with online counseling work, you are indeed talking with a person,
Yeah.
you know? So there's a whole lot of harm in a whole lot of ways, I think, that can come from this distancing oneself from one's emotions. At the same time, what we've talked about is there's oversharing. There's making the counseling conversation about oneself, which is absolutely not appropriate either. And you introduced me to this pretty wonderful book that's called "It's Not About Us," which is by an author named Todd Leader, and Todd focused on transforming mental health and addiction systems in Canada. But as I read this book, I see there's an awful lot of parallels. We could take out mental health and put in dietetics or nutrition counseling, and be reminded constantly that it's not about us. These sessions are not about us. So, could you say a bit more about that from your dietitian slash social worker perspective, which is just fabulous that you have the dual credential?
Yeah, and I really love that idea that it's not about me because initially I used to think it was about me when I would come into a session from an expert role, thinking that I would talk to somebody for a few minutes and I knew exactly what was wrong and I knew what you needed from me. But being able to take a step back and recognize that no, I'm not the expert, that I really need to hear what it is that you're looking for. And then how do I create a relationship with somebody? Because that at the end of the day is going to be the most valuable thing that I could have with a person who is seeking some assistance for whatever reason they walked into my office.
So, Carol, I mean, I 100% agree with you. That's what we're doing here, is talking about these very complex situations that don't tend to get talked about in dietetics education and practicum preparation and so on. Or if they are being talked about, gosh, we'd love to know about that, because that's how we go about making these kinds of changes that will support the people who come seeking our services in the future. I've often heard it said the expert model can be damaging because the focus is too much on the professional person and not enough on the person seeking their service, right? I don't even want to say help or advice because that presupposes that's what they're looking for. But as you say, no one wakes up one day and says, "Oh, my life is perfect. I think I'll go talk to a dietitian today." It just doesn't happen that way. For no matter what area that we're working in as dietitians, be that eating disorders or serious illness like cancer or neurodegenerative diseases, surgical trauma care, all of these things are incredibly emotional. And so building that relationship with people, I started to say, I've heard it mentioned as people are the experts on their own lives. And I agree with that, but that almost seems a bit trite. Of course, what that means is that, and I've drawn a little picture that I've shown you before, that when a person mentions something that they want to talk with you about as a dietitian, behind that is a whole world of things that they've been experiencing. And in order to start the conversation with a dietitian, they might say something that I've called jump to a nutrient. I put that in quotation, in air quotes, jump to a nutrient. People will ask about, well, you've mentioned before, vitamin D, or they might ask about magnesium, or they might ask about, how much vitamin C is in an orange. And that's not because they actually want to know that. It's because that's how they've been able to frame the confusion that they're living with in a way that, oh, maybe if I paid attention to, I've heard vitamin C fights colds and helps with repairing tissues, and because we all took home ec, or maybe we didn't all take home ec, but people have heard those messages before. It's getting to be, wintertime cold and flu season, although because of COVID, we don't have those very much anymore. But the connection between that and vitamin C is pretty well established, right? So it would make sense that people would come and say, what about vitamin C? And pose that as their question. Well, that's jumping to a nutrient, and that's not, and our job is to invoke our skills, bring forth our skills to say to ourselves, it's really not about that, without saying, that's not really why you're here, because that's not helpful either. But to just know that there's something behind that, and be the, as you say, building a relationship, to try to uncover what does that mean for them.
I like that idea of coming from it being very curious. Why would you come to me today to ask me about vitamin C?
I like that.
What do you think? What do you think vitamin C would do for you?
Yeah.
And just taking the curious stance and that unknowing stance, which I think creates that space, creates that relationship for people to be like, oh, yeah, I'm not sure why I'm asking about that, or, this is what I'm thinking, and showing that respect.
Yeah.
Of, there's a reason why you're bringing this to me.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why you're coming to see me to ask me what foods have vitamin C in it versus just looking it up on the internet.
Oh, for sure. People could look. Okay, first of all, I have to say, while Carol's talking, I'm nodding vigorously. Carol's in Thunder Bay, and I'm on the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. So we're on Zoom, and I'm nodding vigorously so she can see me nod. And we're nodding and smiling at each other to encourage us to talk, just as that's an important skill for any of us to have. Yeah, so why this, why now, that approach, right, that you've taught me, like why this issue and why now are these arising, has this arisen for this person, right? That's really helpful. So that's really kind of like the package you're opening, right, Carol? I want to learn about vitamin C. So what is it about vitamin C? I use the phrase often, help me understand what you're thinking,
right,
to get into that. And then what would we call it? Like our sense of professional judgment, or maybe not even professional judgment, our sense of being a human, and a sense of judgment about, does this sound, I'm also thinking about if you meet a perfect stranger, at a party, or, at a dinner or something like that, you engage in a conversation, and there's an ability we have as humans to gauge whether that person is truth telling. Do you know what I mean? is what they're saying and their body language and the nature of them as a whole person that we're observing. Everything has to fit into a package, otherwise you go, something's not right here.
Yeah, right? And I think that's a skill that sometimes as dietitians we were not taught to actually question what we're what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and catching those mismatches to identify that maybe what or the road that I'm taking them down is not the road they want to go down.
Yeah, or maybe not taking them down, but directing them toward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Also, Carol, what I always do is pay really close attention to body movement, facial expressions, and so on. Because one of the things I do it all the time actually, is go back and revisit the whole session, right? To say, I noticed when we were talking about vitamin C, you had a really furrowed brow, or you kind of made a funny dismissive gesture or something like that. So help me understand what the furrowed brow was about, or the dismissive gesture was about, because that helps us, like I'm going to go back to this metaphor of opening a package, right? It helps us unwrap it a little bit more to try to get to the, what's the sparkly, shiny, wonderful thing in the box, right? Like what's really going on here for that person.
Yeah. It's definitely so important to be paying attention to that because people are very complex.
Oh, really?
And well, yeah,
Shockaroo.
chocolate fruit. But I think we tend to forget that because we want to package them
Yeah.
into you're just here to talk to me about your food or about nutrition.
Yeah.
And forgetting that, yeah, there's so much going on in their lives. And this is just one little piece.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah.
looking at that little package of how does that fit into what it is that they are really seeking or what is it that they really why they came in to begin with.
Yeah. So why this? Why now? Like, why today?
Yeah.
And I don't mean because I booked this appointment 6 weeks ago and this is when I got in. There's a reason, there's a catalyst for that person to want to even arrange the appointment. So trying to get at that. And also, quite frankly, it's very difficult when it's 6 weeks later or longer, depending on the wait list, for that person to recall what was on their mind 6 weeks ago, because 6 weeks of life has happened in the interim. Well, you know, Carol, because this is the work that you do every single day.
Well, I
Yeah. So
think
trying to get at why this, why now. I keep repeating that because you taught that to me, and I think it's so simple and so elegant, and something I wish I had known at the get go when I became a dietitian and was let loose on the world. I didn't know anything about this, not a darn thing. And it was only through making really horrible mistakes over the course of my career that I've learned what not to do, really.
that's our biggest teacher, right? We recognize, reflecting back,
You're right.
reflective practice of things that we did wrong. And so I do want to do a shout out if there's any people that I've worked with in the past. When I first started out as a dietitian, I know I didn't do a very good job,
No, I did a crummy job. Yeah,
but I am improving
getting there.
and I continue to
Getting
work at.
there. I mean, I think you've made some really fabulous points that I obviously agree with. That's why we're here and that's why we're friends, even though, funnily enough, we've never actually met in person.
We ask people, well, why this? Why now?
Yeah.
I love when clients come to me and tell me because my doctor told me to come.
Oh, dear. So that's super important and super interesting to talk about. So is it okay if we go that way in our conversation? Because we are talking
Yeah,
about to take emotion out of nutrition counseling, but and we talked about how that's not possible to do for ourselves as dietitians. It's not possible to do that. But let's, if that's okay, we'll talk about people who come and say, I'm here because my doctor told me to come, my
yeah,
physician told me to come,
yeah.
or my nurse practitioner, or my
My
whomever,
loved one,
my loved one, my social worker, my whatever, right?
whatever.
Yeah, that's such an important thing to think about. It's and of course I like to say, and you've heard me say before, because people are dutiful, and especially because the power and privilege that other health professionals, especially physicians, hold, that they don't want to tick off their physician. They want to be seen as, I'm not trying to thwart my therapy here, whatever my therapeutic plan is. I'm trying to be a good person and come along. But they themselves were not the person who had the idea in the first place, right? So I've often phrased that, Carol, with people to say, and yet you don't know why you're here, and you came anyway. So that means something. Tell me what that, help me understand. Back to my help me understand phrase. I use it all the time. Help me understand, how is it that you brought yourself here today, and then see where it goes.
Exactly. I like that because it gives the person that permission to not know why they're there. Because I think sometimes people come and they have that idea that I need to know what it is that I need from a dietitian. Why am I here? Because I don't want to be wasting their time. And if I come to a session and I don't know why I'm coming, well, I'm just wasting your time. There's people who are sicker than I am. There's other people you need to see. But giving people that space and that opportunity to really explore for them, it's like, okay, so your doctor wanted you to come. What was your doctor's concerns?
Yeah.
So
Okay,
is
so
that concerning to you?
gosh, there's so many ways we could go here. So one of the ways I want to go for just a short time, because it's not why we're here, is when the physician has decided that person needs to change their body weight, usually down, right? Lose weight, the magic cure-all of all time, to change their, to lose weight. I also even just say the words. And and I know that that's not really helpful for anybody. In fact, the stress of that hanging over folks makes their life even more stressful. So it's compounding this issue. But what really troubles me, Carol, is when a physician makes that referral and they haven't told the person that's why they're referring them. That's not acceptable. Absolutely not acceptable. So again, I always say to people, the reason I have here on this referral form from your physician is whatever the reason is. Does that resonate with you? Does that make sense with you related to what's going on in your life? And it may or may not. And if it is about weight management, that's another whole road to go down. And maybe we could talk about that some other day, because that's not why we're here today. Not maybe. We will talk about that some other day. But really, to get that person's perspective, it's the beginning of you start creating the relationship before the person even gets in the door or logs on to Zoom or whatever. But it helps to build that as you just said, open the door to create this space for sharing. And I don't know why I said open the door, but to create space for sharing and open it up to dismantle that whole idea that I am the expert and you are going to listen to me no matter what, like to dismantle that. Does that sound something
No,
along the lines of what you do?
definitely is what I'm hoping to achieve, so that people feel that they've been listened to and that I'm not the expert, that my agenda or whatever I think, because I mean, again, when you get a referral form, it'll tell me the reason why whoever sent the referral form thinks the person should be coming to see me.
Yeah.
And it could be a completely, totally different reason why the person came.
And usually is.
Yeah.
Right? I have found a lot of time, I would say the vast majority of time, and let me be clear, I currently work as a professor. Before that, I worked about 20 and a few years in cancer care. And so I have lots of experiences of talking about people who are really frightened, really afraid of what's going on with their health and their life-threatening illness. And I would say that person showing up for that appointment, whether they wanted it to come or not, has a lot to do with this sense of fear on so many levels. Fear that they're going to get into trouble with their physician, fear of their life. Is this actually going to help me live a longer life? And reckoning with the fact that we are mortal and that all of our lives will end one day. And that's scary for a lot of people, and so that whole notion of fear, and I don't think that comes up a whole lot in dietetics training, that people are fearful, and that's why they want to talk to a dietitian.
Oh, exactly. I mean, you think about, for people, we said it, if things are going well, people aren't looking to make changes, right?
There you go. Yep.
It's because we're worried about something. And you love healthcare now, we put in prevention. You're going to go see a dietitian because we're going to talk about preventing heart disease, but there's that fear. There's that underlying fear nugget that's given to people, that you need to see the dietitian so that you don't get this.
Oh boy, as if it's that straightforward.
Get this fixed.
The fear nugget. I love the fear nugget idea. I can just see it sitting there all shiny and
When you think about it, people hold it when they come into our office, right? Or when we see them next to them.
They totally do, Carol. Yeah. So, okay. So let's just backtrack and say, why has a person shown up in my office? They're not going to be, let's be polite about this. You can't go say, why are you here? We're not grumpy, horrible people. It's really trying to uncover what's their truth, if I could put it that way, and understand and know that everybody's holding a fear nugget, which we've never said these words. I never said those words until today, but I really like it. They're holding it and they don't want to show us. And I love this metaphor. I love it. Building the trust so that they will share their fear nugget with us.
Well, yeah, and not feel that we're going to judge them.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the pieces as dietitians. We get a very bad rap of being very judgmental.
Yeah.
Of being, if I, and tell the dietitian what I'm really eating, they're going to think less of me. They're going to be, well, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just, but that's not us.
Oh dear.
That is not us as a profession, unfortunately. No, me too.
I have told you the story of a student had done a project on people with eating disorders, their experiences consulting with dietitians, and one person's story was that whomever she consulted said, it doesn't matter what you do, you'll never look as good as I do, which is just horrific. These are words that should never be spoken by a dietitian. Never, never. So you're absolutely right. This fear of judgment, I mean, that affects a lot of people a lot of the time. And especially when you've put yourself in this pretty scary, pretty vulnerable position of being in a stranger's office and you're holding your fear nugget and they maybe don't even want to recognize that you're holding a fear nugget. And so you just keep that nicely hidden. I'm saying you, I don't mean you, Carol. A person just keeps that nicely hidden. And if they get handed a handout about whatever the dietary changes that would be recommended for someone in their situation, that becomes birdcage liner. It's not useful. She raises her voice in a squeaky fashion. It's not useful because you're not getting at what's the person really doing there. And I don't think, back to our original topic here, we can't get to building that, establishing that connection and that relationship with people without demonstrating that we are emotional beings as well. We do care about them. We've talked about last episode about love and about bringing love into your work as a dietitian. That's, I think, how it cannot be. It's untenable to think about practicing as a dietitian in an emotionless manner. And I absolutely agree with you. The work of all dietitians is, I won't say all, most, is really emotionally heavy. And recognizing that for ourselves and recognizing that it's okay to feel emotionally drained. It's absolutely more than okay to figure out what it is that you need. It's an essential, I would say, to figure out what you need in order to get back onto a emotional plane where you can go back to work the next day. Definitely. Whatever that takes, right? I mean, somebody was mentioning that on something I was in last week about who are the people who recharge your batteries and arrange to connect with them. Carol happens to be one of those people who recharges me, which is very cool. It's probably why we decided to talk to each other once a week, Carol, for all that time. And figure out how you can maintain some distance from the people who drain your batteries, right? But find your rechargers and connect with them. I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, being able to reconnect, being able to be your authentic self in a session. I think about somebody comes in to talk to me and I'm asking them to be very vulnerable because I want them to show me this little fear nugget.
Yeah.
And at the whole point, at some point, in order to make those connections, I need to show a bit of vulnerability too.
Yeah.
And I think being able to sit with somebody in that role of not knowing, of compassionate curiosity.
Oh, I like that.
It gives people that permission. And then I think, as you were talking, I was thinking about, not showing emotion when I'm sitting with somebody, but I was thinking about self-disclosure. And being told as a dietitian, no, you shouldn't tell them anything about yourself. You are the professional. They are coming to see you. You don't tell them anything about themselves. And I think how damaging that can actually be and how difficult it can be to form a relationship with somebody.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really love is the therapeutic use of self.
Uh-huh.
Recognizing that every now and then you'll make a little bit of a self-disclosure when it is appropriate for that building of that relationship or developing an alliance. And I was thinking just yesterday, had a young mom. Actually, it was a couple that were in my office. I could just see in her the concern of what I was thinking about her as a young mom who wasn't really feeding herself, and this judgment of she's going to think I'm a bad mom. And just being able to say to her, it's like, I remember when my kids were really young and how difficult it was to find time for myself, to take care of me and to eat myself. And immediately I could just see the look on her go like, wow, okay, yeah, you're right. I'm really having difficult. And she could then tell me her story about why she wasn't able to get food in for herself.
Yeah. So therapeutic use of self, that's one concept. And then you're not divulging all the nitty gritty details of your life. But yeah, like I've been a young mom of young kids before, and I'm there with you. I get it, right? And look at me, I'm a successful, functional adult, sort of. And I got through it all. Yeah, I mean, I use the example all the time as I live with celiac disease. And so when I've had to talk to people about removing gluten from their diets or any other component that causes their gut to go crazy, to say that, yeah, I avoid gluten religiously because I know what that feels like to be gluten poisoned. And so then people go, oh, you know what this is about. Okay, cool. Not that we all have to only work with the people who share our illnesses or disorders, but to share that, or other people have told me that, blah, blah, blah. And I refer to that as a coping strategy. Well, I didn't make this up. It's very well documented. Social comparison. So comparing oneself to what other people have experienced. So you did that yesterday for that young mom, and I have done that with people living with celiac disease, but I did it every day, all the time with people living with cancer. I've never had cancer. I don't know what that's like. I've never experienced it myself, but I sure have worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were going through that treatment situation, phenomena, treatment, so I'll just call it treatment, who shared with me what it was like, and it's tough. And so I used to always say to people, let's try to work together to make eating less awful. And that acknowledges it is awful. It's not the fun, enjoyable eating I used to engage in. It's pretty gross and I don't like it. Of course it's pretty gross and you don't like it. So there's a really easy kind of situation to imagine oneself in as a dietitian of how do you connect with a person in a way you're emotionally connected with them because they're bearing their soul about what it's like, and honoring how they're feeling without becoming their best pal, because you're not their best pal and you never will be their best pal. That's not our job.
No.
Yeah.
And I listen to that. I don't think anybody would have got into this profession if they didn't care about people. So how can you not sit with somebody and hear their story or their situation and not feel it,
right?
And not give a response back to them.
Yeah.
Whether it's just that nodding of the head or that reassuring little smile that I get what you're telling me.
Yeah.
That's really difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about giving them that support.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said there, Carol. And I think we could talk about that in a future podcast about people's how people develop routines about eating, rituals about eating, shared responsibility. I don't mean shared responsibility. I mean, somebody in a household has responsibility, the primary responsibility for ensuring that everybody else gets fed. And then there are people who just show up and meals are there. I don't happen to be one of those people, and I don't think you are either. You're shaking your head and saying no. Those are really important things to think about too. What is a person's role within the household? And then when a person is ill, and it doesn't have to be illness, it could be anything, really. It could be anxiety related, depression related, recovering from an accident related. It could be anything where life has taken a turn. And then recognizing that that's often what people want to talk about, but they don't know it. And so they've gravitated to a nutrient. And so the skill that you and I have talked about, the art of dietetics, which doesn't say anything to me, it doesn't mean anything to me, but the skill involved in trying to figure out what's the fear nugget and trying to make that comfortable for people to want to tell you about it.
Oh, definitely, because we do know that people will share with us where they're comfortable, where it may not be what is truly at the root of why they actually are sitting with us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the key pieces that I always think about too is one of my professors, Mark, would always speak about is like, how do you get the person to come back and talk to you again?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How do you set up so that they've got that comfort knowing that, yeah, this person actually heard me and it's safe for me to come back. And maybe I didn't disclose or share everything that is going on at this point, around my eating that's concerning to me, but I'm okay to come back and talk to them again.
Yeah.
So that I can then get some assistance or whatever it is that I need with what's truly lying at the root of my eating or my nutrition struggle.
Absolutely. And I think also, Carol, it's important for our listeners to recognize that sometimes people do not talk there is a lot of silence, and for us to grow that comfort ourselves in letting there be silence, like letting that just sit there. I'm not sure if it was you who described it or not, that people coming to see them not being able, like not talking but crying or being teary in the office for a long while, like half an hour or so, and then that person, like that, how comforting is that for a person to know I'm safe to be in here? That crying doesn't mean they're not communicating. They're telling us volumes about what's going on with them, right? And then them feeling comfortable to come back and say, okay, now I can actually talk about what's going on. We don't have to, it's not like I'm thinking about this like nutrition counseling as a cut and dry kind of rational, logical model of, you have a problem, come in. And I'm using my Sergeant Major voice right now. You have a problem, come in. I will tell you what to do about it. And of course, I am always right, and you will do it. And you have talked about seeing oneself as a helper rather than a dictator, I suppose. You didn't say dictator, I'm saying that. But seeing oneself as a helper.
Yeah. Being able to be there to help a person. Because I'm just trying to think, you had said something in it, and it just sort of triggered something in my mind around use of silence. It's being, the tears, when you're talking about that idea. Yeah, there's a misconception out there for a lot of people that food doesn't have emotion attached to it. There is so much emotion attached to food and eating.
100%.
And I was thinking, I don't remember, like, people come into my office and they'll start talking to me and they'll get teary. And then they're like, I'm so sorry, I don't mean to cry. It's like, no, this means that this is really important to you.
Absolutely.
And I want to hear it.
Absolutely. And what a privilege that is to be in a position where people feel that vulnerable and it's safe for them. I think that's... Exactly.
They didn't tell me that in school, just so you know. Over food.
No, that didn't come up when I went to school either. And Carol, here's the thing that concerns me. I do talk about this in my work with students, and often I'll have students tell me that's just the fluffy stuff I don't need to worry about. And I get really concerned about that because, as we've just talked about now for 42 minutes, this is the nature of nutrition counseling work, is to relate to another human on a human-to-human level, acknowledging their emotion and their confusion, and seeing oneself as a helper, but not being prescriptive about that. So is that a good place for us to wrap up for today?
I think so. That was pretty heavy.
That was really heavy. Yeah, not prescriptive. And we come from a culture of, well, I know you and I could talk about this for another hour, but we will not. But coming from a culture in our training that's as easy as it gets. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Maybe we could talk next time about diet sheets and how not appropriate they are many times, or how they, not so much that, but they minimize
what dietitians can actually offer to people.
Yeah.
I think there's that misconception. Like you said, you and I can talk about that for hours. But really, it really pigeonholes us and sells us short. Yeah. If people think that all they can do is come in and talk to a dietitian to get information about a food or about a nutrient.
Yeah.
And that's not who we are as a profession.
And I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, and I'll share this with everybody else. Long before there was a thing called the internet, I gave a talk called What's the Difference Between Me and a Brochure Rack? And I think the internet, I think about it related to food and nutrition, it's one monster, giant, ever-growing brochure rack. And there is a reason that people want to talk to a human dietitian and not a brochure rack, right? Or the internet. I'm just going to look some stuff up. It's the desire to have a person. I love the fear nugget idea. I think that's what we'll entitle this episode of, I have a fear nugget. I've looked at the brochure rack. Nothing is addressing what I'm really feeling, and I need to talk to a person about this, right? It's the same as investments. You could do your own investing and so on the internet, but what I really want, because I know nothing about that at all, is to entrust advice giving to a person that's what they do every day, all day. They love thinking about that, and I would rather not, thank you. I just want to know that my hard-earned earnings are safe and so on, right? So I could look it all up, but I don't, because it's just a whole other world that's big and confusing, and I don't want to, actually. Boy, is eating ever different, because we cannot survive without eating. And so, gosh, our work is tough. And I guess maybe that's a place to end, is for all of our listeners. Gosh, our work is tough. And we do it because of love. We do it because we honor and value other humans. And if people are back to what we talked about podcast one, if some of our listeners are feeling as a dietitian, I don't think I'm cut out for this game. No, it's not a game. I don't think I'm cut out for this work. Maybe it's not that you're not cut out, it's that the work needs to evolve, or let's work somehow together, all of us, to evolve the nature of the work so that we are the kind of helpers that people are looking for. If that's what they want, they maybe don't even want help, they want a listening ear. Okay, Carol, have a lovely rest of the day in Thunder Bay, Ontario.
Same to you, Kathy, and we'll chat with you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.